I got this quote from Yvon Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing. If you haven't read it, you should. It'll change the way you think about business and possibly change the way you think about life. I wouldn't consider myself a big entrepreneur, but I am a delinquent, and I'll kind of spell that out through a few slides here. Like you said, I grew up in a town called Danville. It's inland of San Francisco, about 45 minutes inland. And when I moved there as a child in the early 70s, it was basically a cattle town, cattle ranches, and mixed with kind of old school money. There's some country clubs and whatnot, but it's a really quiet place. I was kind of like any kid. I played all the ball sports, soccer, football, baseball, and all that. And when I got around 12 years old, I was kind of tired of all that. It seemed like organized sports was part of a system that I didn't want to be a part of. It wasn't creative. It felt very sterile. And I was just kind of bored of the whole idea. I then got a skateboard when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and it kind of sounds funny, but that changed my life forever. It changed the whole trajectory of my entire life from then on out. It allowed me to do something that was totally independent, super creative. There wasn't any winners or losers. You can just go out and do your own thing. It was a blank canvas every day, and it really changed the way I thought about things. It changed the way I viewed the world. I then got a haircut and started listening to punk rock. This is in the early 80s, and I'm sure all of you know about the punk rock movement of the early 80s, but when you're a kid, 12 years old, and you're trying to kind of figure out your life and whatnot, you hear this new music and it really resonates with you. It's kind of like maybe the hippie movement was of the 60s. And it wasn't so great for my parents. I got in a lot of trouble and was kind of an outcast, but for me, it formed the way I looked at the world. And I fell in with a bunch of like-minded individuals that were also kind of disenchanted with the town that we lived in. It was a beautiful place, but we felt like we lived in this bubble, and we all wanted to see something different and see what was outside of our little town. And we had to fend for ourselves. We had to build our ramps, and as you can tell, they were pretty bad. We would just go around in little scrap piles and build these little junky things to try to skate, and they were sketchy and dangerous, but that's what we had to do, you know. It's us little kids. And this is around like 79, 80, maybe 81. And, we had to sneak into places to go skate. There wasn't skate parks at the time. They were all closed. So this is, we have a fishing pole and tackle box. We had to fake it like we were fishermen to go sneak into this place to skate. And we'd sneak into abandoned houses that had backyard pools and kind of run amok. This is one of our favorite pools that we'd sneak into and have parties and stuff. And I got to reiterate that this was early 80s. Skateboarding now is a big industry. It's a multi-million dollar industry. And at this time, all the magazines were shut down. All the skate parks had closed down. Skateboarding was totally underground, and it wasn't cool. You were an outcast if you were skating. So we had to fend for ourselves, and we had to steal our own wood to make our ramps to skate. There wasn't anything to skate, and we didn't have a lot of support, and I don't think we really wanted support. We wanted to figure things out for ourselves, although we had to steal to do it. And that's a friend of mine with some freshly stolen wood. Statute of limitations are up now, so. And our ramps got a lot bigger. They got bigger and better, and we would just kind of build them in the backyards. Like this one, took up a whole tennis court. And looking back, I'm amazed that we were able to do this at 16, 17 years old. Our parents weren't helping us, and we had to build these things by ourselves. We had to figure out the plans. There wasn't any videos on YouTube we can figure out. We had to really do it ourselves, and it really gave us a sense of independence and that we can accomplish something, that we can do something on our own, and it really affected the way all of our lives kind of went after that. Now it's kind of a buzzword. It's like the DIY selling point for a lot of brands, but it really was a DIY kind of situation back then. And as skaters, we got better. This is a few years later. This is probably 87, 88. And we were starting to skate better. We were taking better photographs, and our ramps were big. And some of the photography is as good as anything that was running in the magazines at the time. And around this time, when I got my license, I could finally drive, and because I could drive, I can go to the ocean. And the next step for skateboarding seemed to be surfing, and I got into surfing. And my friends and I would do all these trips along the northern coast where I lived in California. And this is us on our first surf trip to Baja. This is, I think we're seniors in high school, and this is our first trip away from home. Super excited. And it was also a time where everybody's getting ready to go to college and move on with their lives. And my dad had a big talk with me around this time, kind of the what are you going to do with your life talk. And I really had no plans. I'd been kicked out of high school. I was wandering around surfing. I was hanging with my friends. And he said, if you want, you can make millions of dollars if you put your mind to it. And I believe that's true. But I also knew what it takes to make $1 million. And I didn't want to slave my life away just to make money. And I told my dad that I thought things were backwards, that we work our whole lives and then we retire when we're old, and then we're old and we can't do anything. And I told him I'm going to play when I'm young and work when I'm old. And of course he just rolled his eyes and said, yeah, kids know everything, right? So I did what any surfer in his right mind would do, is I moved to Hawaii. And luckily, my parents were pretty supportive of that. They told me they wish they did the same thing when they were young. And so I moved there and I got into surfing tenfold. I moved to the North Shore of Oahu, where it's the epicenter of the surf world. And the waves were much bigger than I had at home, so I had to really kind of teach myself how to surf and how to get along in these big waves. And it was a huge learning curve for me, This is at the famous Bonsai Pipeline. Some of you might have heard of, one of the most photographed waves in the world. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to become a fireman, because the firemen, at least in the States, I don't know how it is here, the firemen only work about 10 days a month. And I needed a schedule that can afford me a lifestyle that I can surf a lot. So I wanted to be a fireman, but I took a little more macho route, and I became a flight attendant. And and it wasn't the job that I was attracted to, as the lifestyle. It was basically fireman hours. I only worked 5 or 10 days a month, but now I could travel the world for free on my days off, and that's just what I did. And then I got a job as a North Shore lifeguard right there on Oahu, and what this afforded me to do is when the days that I wasn't working as a flight attendant or traveling, I could be on the beach, being paid to be on the beach all day and also save lives, because I wanted to be a fireman, and now I could. And this is some of the most rewarding work I've ever had, is to be able to save lives on a daily basis. So for 12 years, I juggled both these jobs as a flight attendant and as a lifeguard. And so I just started traveling around. Here I'm in Australia on a 6-week road trip around the country. There's some climbing that we were doing in Mount Arapiles there. Indonesia. That's me surfing in mainland Mexico. This is Tavaru Island in Fiji. I got a job there as a boatman and lifeguard, and I stayed in these tree forts for about 30 days, about a month. That's on my friend's boat in Greece. So I was traveling a ton, and I was a horrible student. Like I said, I got kicked out of high school, but I had a teacher that really encouraged me to read, and so I became an avid reader. But I was a very slow reader, and she told me to don't speed up, just stay slow. You'll retain much more if you just read slow. And she sent me journals, and I just kept on writing in these journals. So I'd travel, and I'd just keep these journals, and I was meeting all sorts of characters and people along the way, and taking notes and writing all these stories. And my favorite magazine was the Surfer's Journal, still is. And to be in, the Surfer's Journal to me was like the holy grail. To get your stuff published in that was the pinnacle of either surf photography or surf journalism. And I really wanted to get something published in that magazine. But then I thought, they're getting submissions from all over the world, some of the best photographers and writers all over the world. How am I going to just out of the blue get published in this magazine? And my dad always told me the best thing to do if you really want something, you just have to show up. My dad had he was a general contractor, he had a construction business, and he said this kid used to come by every day and ask for work, and they'd always turn him away. Finally, they hired him because they just got sick of him asking. They hired him for about a week. He did a terrible job, And then he came back again, and what bugged him so much, they hired him again. And he was a horrible worker, but he just kept on getting hired because he's so persistent. And so I just took it upon myself. I got on a plane and just flew to California and knocked on the Surfers Journal's door. And no one does that. They're like, what are you doing here? And I said, I want to talk to you guys. I have all these photos and some writing, and this is my deal. So I was able to sit down with the editor and the publisher and talk a while and get to know them. And as I was driving away, they called me and they said they're going to publish this article. And I can't tell you how excited I was to hear that my favorite publication was going to publish something that I wrote. And to me, it was like winning the lottery or something. And it really sparked something in me that I could do something, that I had a talent. I could write. I can tell stories, and people will want to hopefully hear them and or read them. And this started a relationship that continues on to this day. This first publication was in 1999, and I've written probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen articles for them since. So around this time, I met these three brothers called the Malloy brothers, and they're kind of a powerhouse trio in the surf world. They're three brothers that were traveling the world, and they were pretty prominent in the surf world, pretty famous. And not just for their surfing, is the way they kind of created this lifestyle. And their oldest brother, Chris Malloy, started making surf movies in the mid-90s. And him and a few guys really changed how surf documentation was being done. They used old 16mm footage. And we met in around the mid-90s, and we really hit it off. So we all moved into a house together. This is where we lived. It was right on the north shore of Oahu. There's Rocky Point, famous surf spot right out in front of our house. And we just kind of held up there for about 10 years. Next. And we also started climbing around that time. So we had a climbing wall in our garage. And we weren't real serious, but we kind of messed around the climbing wall, and then we'd surf out front. We kind of had this really cool lifestyle going on. Next. And we discovered a climbing spot on the North Shore. Here's a friend of mine, Hidetaka, climbing on the North Shore there. Next. And we found out that this bay called Waimea Bay, it's famous for some of the biggest waves in the world, that also had some rocks to boulder on. So we'd go down to Waimea Bay, we'd surf, and then we'd climb on the rocks at the bay. And you'd never know, this is kind of a flat day. And when it's flat, we'd go down there and climb. Next. And then on big days, we'd go out there and surf. And it was kind of like this perfect little thing there. We had a climbing wall at our house, we had surf in front of our house, and we had Waimea Bay where we would boulder and surf. Next. And around this time, around 2000, I got my first camera. It was kind of the next step to storytelling. If I was going to write, I might as well take pictures. And I've always looked around at, I got into photography and I asked a lot of questions. This is back in the film days, you had to buy film and get good lenses and stuff. And I was living in the epicenter of the surf world, the North Shore. I was surrounded by some of the biggest, best waves in the world and some of the best talent in the world. But I had no inclinations of shooting the surf, because everybody else was doing that. And I've always had a thing where I look at what everybody else is doing, and instead of imitating, I just go do something different, because that's how you're going to stand out. What are you going to bring to the table that's different than anybody else? So everybody's shooting surf, and I wasn't into the surf. Next. Oh, please go back to that other one. And I love shooting photos that in years are going to mean something. Like, they're selling rocks. This is on the North Shore. There's bunch of lava rock all over the place. And John, the kid in the back, is now probably one of the biggest, most famous surfers in the world, but this is when he was around, 6 years old. Next. And I was into street photography. I was into capturing moments beyond the high tide mark. I wasn't interested in the actual surf action, though I did start to shoot that later. I was more interested in kind of what happened beyond surfing and what was going on. Here, you can kind of think for yourself there, what's going on there. But and I was into lifestyle. Lifestyle was a big thing to me. And I was starting to submit to different places. All my friends were shooting surf and submitting to the surf magazines and surf brands. And I was shooting lifestyle and something kind of different. And I was, go to the next one, please. Go to the next one. So I started shooting, started sending photos to Patagonia, which was my favorite brand at the time, and I really didn't even wear a lot of Patagonia gear at the time. I was just fascinated with their brand and what they stood for. And I started submitting photos there, and this is one of my first submissions. Is the first time I ever shot underwater. I borrowed my friend's camera. We went out to this diving place, and I shot my friend diving and submitted it. And Patagonia wrote back that they were going to buy one of my slides for, it was like $3,000 for 3 years usage. And I mean, $3,000 was a ton of money back then. And it was like something clicked. I'm like, well, because, you know, editorial, it was fun to do, but I couldn't make any money at it. So I was thinking, no, maybe photography, there's something there. Maybe I can kind of do this as a profession. But I didn't really take it serious. But the photo editor there obviously saw something because she started to pay for my film and processing, which is a lot of money back then. Sometimes you can shoot $200, $300 worth of film a day. So she started really kind of fostering my photography and pushing me in that direction. Go ahead. And also around that time, I was getting kind of a reputation for surfing and kind of living that lifestyle on the North Shore. And Patagonia also started sending me clothes to not only shoot, but clothes to test. So they'd send me board shorts and a lot of the surf gear that they were working on, and I'd take notes and I'd send them back to their product team. And it was a relationship that started and just went on forever. And they ran it, this is an ad that they ran of me as a test tube pilot back in the day. And one day out of the blue, this is around 2003, so I've been getting stuff published with Patagonia. I've been doing articles for Surfer's Journal, and I get a call from Yvon Chouinard. And I thought it was one of my friends messing with me. Like, this is the guy, this is one of my biggest heroes. I just look up to this guy, and all of a sudden he's talking to me on the phone, and I thought it was my buddy just messing with me. I couldn't believe it. But anyways, he said he was going on a surf trip with him and his son down in the Tuamotu Islands just north of Tahiti, and he asked if I'd go and maybe write an article and take some photos. And I said, let me check my schedule, Of course, I dropped everything to go. Next one. But I asked him if he wanted to go live on a pearl farm for about a week before the trip. And there's this place I heard of that you can go work for your room and board. It's kind of wolfing, I guess. And I didn't know if he would be into it, but he was totally stoked on the idea. And so we went to this island to work on the pearl farm, and we lived in the little plywood shacks there for about a week. Next one. And we dove for pearls. They're grafting pearls right there. Next one. And it was rigorous work. You dove all day with the guys, and you slept in a plywood shack, and Yvon and I just kind of hit it off. He loves that kind of stuff. He really is the true blue kind of adventure, kind of dirtbag that he seems like. Like, he's really that kind of guy. And he didn't mind sleeping on the floor in a plywood shack and diving all day. In fact, he loved it. Next one. So during that trip, he tells me that him and his son are going to relaunch the surfing component of the Patagonia brand. And I've been paying close attention to Patagonia for years, and I know that they've tried to do this maybe 4 times before, and it's failed every time. They never really stuck. They've done ads in Surfer's Journal, they've put out product, but it never really took hold. And I was a huge fan of Patagonia, but in the surf category, they were kind of missing the mark. So they told me they were going to launch this whole thing, and I really felt that they were going to fail again, and because they were going about it the same way. And of course, I didn't tell them, oh, you're going to fail. I just kind of thought about that, and it got the wheels turning for me. I knew that these are the Malloy brothers that I was living with on the North Shore. That's Keith on the right, Dan, the youngest, in the middle, and that's Chris Malloy on the end. I knew the Malloy brothers were looking for something different. They were surfing for Hurley. They had been pro surfers since they were about 15, and they'd been peddling, surf gear that they, for their whole lives that they didn't really totally support. It was just kind of selling T-shirts for brands that, it's that whole model of you're a pro surfer, go out and surf, and we're going to sell some T-shirts, And I know they were looking for something different. And I was too. I was still working as a flight attendant and a lifeguard, but I was starting to take pictures and write, and I was kind of looking to do something different in my life too. So the wheels kind of started turning. And without talking to the brothers or anybody about it, I put together this whole plan that I was going to eventually kind of pitch to Patagonia. Next one. And so I was in Ventura one time, staying at one of the Malloy's family's house, and I was hanging out with Yvonne Chenard a lot and having coffee. And one day, I was kind of telling Yvonne little snippets of what I thought about the whole surf program. And one day I was over at his house, and he said, well, there's a friend there, and he said, why don't you tell my friend here what you're thinking? And I don't know, I just unleashed this whole thing. I just said, hey, you're going to launch the surf thing. It's going to fail. I've seen you do it 4 times in a row. You're going to do the same thing again. Patagonia, this is 2003. I said, Patagonia, they have the best team. They have the best athletes, the best story. How come I don't know about the story? How come you guys don't do books? You don't do films? You have like 3 T-shirts. T-shirts can be a huge part of your brand. I just kind of went off of everything I felt. And the guy, little did I know the guy I was telling this to was the CEO of Patagonia, but he was just in flip-flops and a T-shirt. I had no idea this was a CEO. And he asked, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I don't know, I'm a lifeguard and flight attendant, take some photos. And so that kind of started a little buzz, and I went and told Chris about it, the oldest brother, and I told him what I was thinking, and he said, how long have you been working on this? I said, about a couple months. I've been poking around Patagonia. I've been kind of seeing who's who and what's what, and I actually told the CEO that you guys might be interested. Are you interested? And he goes, yeah, hell yeah, that sounds great. So a long story short, next one. The Malloys got hired. They quit Hurley, and they went on to Patagonia in 2004, and it was a huge shockwave through the surf industry. Because the Malloys, they've been with Hurley since they were 15, and they could have rode the gravy train the rest of their lives. And why would they quit that to go with a brand, some obscure outdoor brand in Ventura? Next one. And it was great. It was now finally these guys, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit. They all got hired, and it was a big buzz, and they all got hired at Patagonia. And then I went back to Hawaii, and I was thinking, well, what am I doing? That's great. I kind of brokered the whole deal, but now I'm just kind of back home. So I called Chris after a flight from Japan for my flight attendant gig, and I said, hey, I want that to be the last flight I ever do. And he goes, well, get over here. So I went over there, and I convinced I took a walk with the CEO, and I wrote him a letter, and I said, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to work, and blah, blah, blah. You're going to need somebody that wears many hats during this thing. You're going to launch the whole surf category. I could wear many hats. And I said, just my photography alone will be enough to justify my salary. So he hired me too. So all 4 of us got hired to launch the Patagonia surf component. And it was a huge endeavor because no other brand had ever, at this point, no other brand had ever broken into the surf industry that didn't begin as a surf brand. There's a lot of brands that have tried to get into surf, but they've all failed at this point. So we had a lot of work ahead of us. And I give Patagonia, a lot of props for hiring a bunch of guys that none of us have a degree in marketing. We're not accountants. We just have a lot of experience. And that's what we were bringing to the table. And I think that's what the Chenards recognize is these guys know what they're talking about. And they can bring a lot to the table, more than anybody else can. Next one. So to launch this, we got hired in 2004. We worked on designing clothing and wetsuits and. Oh, is that it? Okay, thank you. We worked on developing the line for 2 years on the marketing plan, the photos, the product, and we were involved in everything, in merchandising the catalogs and creating the ads. I was shooting the photos. We were working with the designers on product. Super exciting for us. And so we hit the road, and we created a website called Bend to Baja, and we did a road trip from all the way up to Oregon, down to the tip of Baja in a truck that runs on vegetable oil. And this is Keith filling it up with veggie oil. And it was a 40-day road trip where we surfed our way down. This is Keith surfing Mavericks. Climbing in Smith Rock, Oregon. So we kind of mixed, we were really into the whole idea of mixing climbing and surfing together. And this is driving down through Oregon, Northern California, camping out in Baja, surfing in Baja, some more surfing down there. And we were taking pictures and we were testing product and we were meeting people and kind of getting to know our backyard again, because we'd been traveling all over the world at this point. And now we're finally in our backyard where we grew up, kind of rediscovering our homeland, so to speak. And we actually found some climbing at the tip of Cabo San Lucas. And so what I didn't realize at the time until years later that in doing this, I had created the position, the first staff photographer position, which was really cool. I thought Patagonia always had staff photographers, but the deal I set up and what I'd been doing over the last couple of years was basically the first staff photographer position. And I held that for, the next 13 years or so. So around 2006, we had a new plan, a new idea. And there's this film called Mountain of Storms. And if I go back maybe 6 years, around 99, 2000, Chris Malloy and I were visiting his parents in Ventura. And this girl walked up to me that I knew. And again, this was in 2000. She handed me this old dusty VHS tape. And she said, hey, I think you guys would really appreciate this film. You guys got to watch it. It's been sitting in the Patagonia vault for 40 years, and no one's supposed to watch it outside the company. And so I snuck it out, and I'm giving it to you guys to watch. So old VHS tape, we brought it to his parents' house, and we turned it on. And it was basically a trip that Yvon Chouinard and Doug Tompkins did back in 1968. They drove a van from Ventura, California, all the way down to the tip of Patagonia to climb Mount Fitzroy. And they made this whole movie about it. It's scored to original music. It has blank spots for commercials. It's like an hour and 20 minutes long. And it's this beautiful film. And it's been sitting in the vault for 40 years. And we looked at each other and we're like, why is this sitting in a vault? How come nobody has seen this? Because it's basically the story of their brand right under their noses. It was the trip. This is before they left. That's Doug Tompkins on the left, and that's Yvon Chouinard, the second from the right. This is the trip that formed these guys' lives. This is what changed their lives forever. This is 1968. Doug Tompkins had already started the North Face, and he'd already sold it by 1968. Yvon Chouinard had Chouinard equipment, but he hadn't started Patagonia yet. This is the trip that he went down to Patagonia and came back and said, I'm going to start making gear that can last in Patagonia, and I'm going to call it Patagonia. So we're looking at each other going, this is the trip that defined these guys' characters and defined the brand. And we couldn't believe no one had seen this and no one been doing anything with it. So immediately we wanted to set out and do our own trip just like this, Chris and I. And Chris had made, at that point, a bunch of surf movies. And we talked about it for years. Again, this was in 2000 when we saw this. And now it's 2006, and we started talking about it. We're like, hey, let's do that trip. Now we work for these guys. Why don't we set out on our own and do something, either our own trip or kind of in the spirit of these guys? So we did. We convinced them that we could do this, and we got the plan together to make this movie called 180 South. Some of you might have seen it. I think these guys played it last night. In that movie, kind of one of the main themes is there's a thing with climbers, they call it sandbagging. It's when you tell somebody it's really easy and it's super hard. Or you take somebody that's not a skier skiing, or on the way down to Fitzroy, they go skiing and climbing and doing all this stuff, and they're basically sandbagging each other. So the first trip, the first part of the trip, just in their spirit, we wanted to climb El Capitan in Yosemite. It's a 3,000-foot wall. The dark shadowed area over to the right, Yvon Chouinard did the first ascent in, I think, 1964. It's called the North American Wall. So we said, hey, let's climb the North American Wall in the spirit of Yvon, and let's take somebody up there that's never climbed before. So we took Chris's middle brother, Keith. And Keith he's afraid of heights, and he's only climbed a couple times in his life. So we decided, hey, we're going to take you up that thing. And poor guy didn't talk for days, and we ended up getting caught in a storm. We were up there for 7 days. And that's Keith in his sleeping bag. And he, poor guy, he barely even spoke the whole time. And so it was a great way to start out the trip with a big climb. And this is a cave that's kind of a famous cave that Yvonne slept in with his buddies when they did the first ascent, years and years ago. And they got caught in a storm too, which is kind of ironic. So I went down, I got a ride with a guy, kind of found out a guy that was driving down to Mexico because I needed to jump on this boat to Chile. And so I went down through Mexico, got on the boat and sailed out through, this is between Cocos Island and the Galapagos. We had a little trouble out there. If you see the movie, we broke a mast, all kinds of stuff went wrong, but ended up in Easter Island, which they call Rapa Nui. Ended up there for about a month, kind of shipwrecked. And then made it down to Chile. And this is a mountain called Cerro Corcovado. It's down in Patagonia region where Doug Tompkins has all these parks. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. So that trip that Doug and Yvonne went on, Yvonne came back and started Patagonia because of that trip. And then Doug went on to start Esprit, that big clothing company, Esprit. And he sold his shares in the late 80s for, billions of dollars. And he took all his money down to Patagonia and he started buying up all this land and restoring it and giving it back to Chile as national parks. And so Corcovado is a mountain inside his park. And right now, it's all happening right now. They're being released chunk by chunk into these huge national parks down there. And so we went down to hang out with Doug and Yvonne and to do a little climbing inside the park. And so our first thing we wanted to do is stand on top of Corcovado. The only person that had ever climbed this before was Doug Tompkins, and he did it by himself, I think back in the 80s or something. And we hung out with Yvonne. He came on the climb with us. And I'm telling you, the guy really walks the walk. We were down there with some other Chilean climbers, and one of the climbers said, "Are you Yvon Chouinard?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "No, you're not. You can't be." And he goes, "Why don't you have any new Patagonia stuff? Your stuff's really old." So that jacket, I think, is from like 99 or something. His pants are same age. His boots are really old. His crampons and ice axe, he forged himself in the 70s. And he goes, "No, he's really humble." They said, "You're not Yvon Chouinard." He goes, "Well, yes, I am." And they said, "Why don't you have anything new?" And he goes, "I don't need anything new. That's if I'm making good product, it should last forever." I mean, he really said that. So, but he really walks the walk. And so it took us about 3 days just to circumnavigate that whole mountain and get through the jungle and get to a place where we could actually make a bid for the summit. And this is a place where they had a mudslide that came through all these trees. It's just a beautiful, kind of unique area. And it was great to see Yvon climbing again. He hadn't climbed for a long time. At this point, I think he was around 69, 70 years old. And he just was having a blast. And we took a friend of ours that we met in Easter Island. Her name's Makohe. And here's more of the sandbagging part. She'd never seen snow in her life. And she's never been on any mountains like this. So we took her climbing to Corcovado. And she loved it. I mean, she was climbing glaciers and everything. Just a little island girl. So we get about 200 feet from the summit, and we get shut down. Basically, it just gets too dangerous. It's as you can see, the rock was kind of like kitty litter. If you just touched it like this, it would just crumble off. And I'm standing on the edge of about a 500-foot drop, and usually you have an anchor in there or something, but there's nothing to anchor. It's just dirt. And Timmy's tied to me, my friend Timmy O'Neill, and if he falls, he's tied to me, and we're just going to whip over the edge, 500 feet onto a glacier. And it was at this moment where he backed off. He said, "If it's too dangerous to go any further." And it was a pretty heavy thing, You come all this way, and you've been thinking about it for years, and we get right close to the summit, and we get shut down. We had to back off. Here's Chris Malloy goofing around on the glacier. He's down below. He's not a climber, so he didn't go up above it. He's one of my best friends, and it's so fun. This was a dream of ours. Here we are. He's made about 10 of these at this point, but here we are working with our biggest heroes, best friends, and we're making a movie. It's just one of the greatest times of our life, and he's yelling at us through the CB. He just loves CBs and radios and stuff. He's just goofing off. But he was totally kidding. He goes, "You guys come down. I don't want you guys getting hurt, But it's the whole thing about climbing, it's about the climb. It's never about the summit. And if you're concentrating on the summit, then something's wrong. You know, it's some of the best climbs. If you talk to any climber, some of their best climbs are the ones that they failed on, because those are the ones you learn from, and those are the ones usually have the best stories. If everything goes right, it's kind of boring, right? And you just reach the summit, big deal. But climbing is all about the actual climb and your relationship with others and your relationship with your friends, and it's a good metaphor for life. You know, I try to treat life as the same. It's not out here. It's kind of in the moment. It's what you're doing in the moment that counts. And you know, it's something that was really prevalent in this climb too. It's like, this is what we were doing, and who cares if we didn't stand on the top of that? So we came back down, and this is Doug Tompkins. So him and his wife Christine have Chris Tompkins. They have put their life work into developing this land for parks. And Yvonne and Patagonia, they've been putting a bunch of money and time into it as well. And they've devoted everything to making these parks. And it's so great to hang out with him. He's such an interesting character. He just passed away a couple years ago, or last year, and it's so sad. We're all going to miss him. But him and Yvonne have been climbing together, and they've been friends for 50 years at this point or whatever. And you know, that movie that Chris and I watched way back in, you know, 99 or 2000, it was these guys climbing together, and they were, you know, probably 25, 28 years old. And to see him now, you know, we went back down to the park, and he said, hey, there's another mountain here that we tried to climb one time that we should give that a go. So him and Yvonne asked me if I wanted to go climb this mountain with them. And so I'm a climber, but I'm a rock climber. Alpine climbing is a little scarier. You have a lot of kind of things that can go against you. If things go wrong, it can go really bad. And I've read a lot of alpine books, and they're all horrible stories. So I had, you know, Gore-Tex gear and all kinds of stuff on me, and I show up and look at Doug. He's in actual tennis shoes that you play tennis in. He's in pressed slacks. He's got a cashmere sweater on and a pressed shirt and a golf hat. And that's his whole attire. He's like, hey, we're ready to go. I'm like, okay. But he's so casual, right? And this is on the approach up. Oh, sorry. So the mountain is behind him, that peak up there. It's an unnamed peak, and it's in one of his parks. And it's an unnamed peak that him and Yvonne years later tried to climb. But Yvonne showed up, of course, in hiking and mountain climbing boots that were 40 years old, and they just shattered to pieces 10 steps in, so they got shut down. So they never made it up it. So this is going to be the second try. And these guys are great. Like Yvonne, well, there's Doug again. It's like the turtle and the hare. Yvonne is probably 69 at this time, and he's just the turtle. He just walks forever. He's really slow but consistent. And Doug was so fast, I couldn't even keep up with him. He's 65. And he just had something put in his heart for a heart arrhythmia or something. And he had heart condition, and he was still just like lightning. I couldn't even keep up with the guy. It was amazing. And, you know, he used to deal with heavy politics down there. In Chile, what he was doing, he wasn't the best communicator. So a lot of Chileans were a little suspicious of what he was doing. Here's this American coming down here and buying millions of acres, and what is he up to? So he had a lot of kind of adversaries. And so he can be a very serious person, and he deals with a lot of politics. And it's not until recently that the Chilean people have really got behind what he's doing, because now he's giving these back as parks. And they're some of the biggest parks in the world. I think the biggest private land conservations in the world. And but getting Doug and Yvonne out of their worlds and out into what they do best is being a climber. It was just so fun that just the guards come down, and they're real true blue, just climbers, just like your everyday guys. Such great guys to hang out with. There's Doug, there's Yvonne making food. And this is really where it's classic. It's like, this is what these guys have been doing their whole lives. And as soon as you get them out on the trail or out doing this, they just turn into these kids. They just have such a blast. This is early morning, making our bid for the summit. This is a proud moment for me as a photographer. It was a little difficult trip for me. I was in front of the camera I was the main protagonist in the film, so I was being shot a lot. So a lot of times when the light is this beautiful, I can't shoot because I can't have my camera out while they're filming me. So I literally I was walking with my ice axe, and I had a point and shoot camera down here, and I clicked off 3 shots. And I was just kind of trying to hold it in a good position, and I ended up getting one of my favorite shots of the whole trip right here. And then we made it. We got to the top. And it was the coolest thing. I've never done a first ascent before. And right before we get to the summit blocks, Doug steps aside, and he just kind of goes like this to me. And, go ahead, it's yours. And I was just standing there, and there's a summit. And he goes, you've never done a first ascent. This is all yours. And I looked at him, I just said, I can't. I mean, this is your mountain and your park, and you guys have tried this once already. I'm not, you have to be the first. So he went and stood up on it, and we all got up there, and it was beautiful. You can see all the peaks around. You can just see forever. And I said, what are you going to name it? And he said, I'm going to name it Sarah Christine, after his wife. It was the coolest thing. And that kind of capped off the end of the movie, and it was just, looking back, it's just, to be able to spend time with these guys that I've looked up to for so long, and to kind of meet them on a very real level and see what they're all about. You have your heroes, and sometimes you meet your heroes, and it's maybe not the best thing. You're a little disappointed, like sometimes your heroes are better if you just don't meet them. And meeting these guys, they were far exceeded my expectations. They were just true blue legends. And so the adventure goes on. I've just, my career just kind of evolved into this. I never really set out to do this. It was kind of something that just took hold little by little, and I just kind of picked away at it. And it's been a lot of hard work, and it's just kind of organically taken place. And I think if I can give one bit of advice, it'd be, whatever you're getting into, whatever it may be, just pour your entire life into it and have it become you. That's what these guys have done. And it's what they do. It's not just something they do. It's their whole life. It's who they are. And if now I'm getting a little older, I can look back, and if I have a little success, it has to do with me just pouring myself into this, whether I was going to make money or not, because that was never the goal for me. And I think if you really pour your heart into it, that's a success. If you're pouring your heart into something, it's not going to be the money or any monetary reward in the end. And I think that'll come if you do believe in it. So the adventure continues. I've been shooting now for about 17 years, professionally for about 15 years, and I'm just gonna keep on picking away at it. Here's New York. We snuck up onto the Brooklyn Bridge at 2 a.m, shot some photos up there. The New York Public Library. This didn't happen, by the way. This did not happen. It's on El Capitan in Yosemite. Same guys, exhausted. Ramon Navarro, he's a famous surfer from Chile. He's an environmentalist also. On top of El Capitan. And there's Yvonne. This is I love to do portraits, and to me, this kind of says it all. I got to spend time with Yvonne in a place where it all began for him, and we're on a boat down in remote Patagonia. He's drinking mate that he loves, and I got this shot, and to me, it's what I believe a portrait should be. It's somebody really in their element, shows a lot of history here. And I'm going to leave you guys with a video here. Wait, can we pause it just for a second?
A horrible road trip story.
So just to give you a little backstory on this, when we made the movie 180 South, we had about 200 hours of footage to make an hour and 20-minute film. So you can imagine the stuff that was on the cutting floor. So Chris Malloy, the director, started putting these short movies together, and they're all about 5 minutes of just some leftover film. And hopefully we can hear this. This is Yvonne talking about he calls it a road trip from hell, and it's about hitchhiking across the United States. And it kind of goes back to being a delinquent, because Yvonne was a delinquent when he was young too, and I think he still thinks like a delinquent. That's how he's done business. He just breaks all the rules. He does whatever he wants. So anyways, I really appreciate the time here. I think I'll do a Q&A after. Is that right? Or no? Okay. But thank you very much. I'm going to leave you with a great film. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Road trip from hell. I was so desperate one time trying to get a ride out of, I don't know, Nebraska or Kansas. I was like 18 years old, I guess. When I finally got a ride, I was so cold that I couldn't tell this truck driver where I was going. I mean, my mouth wouldn't move. I finally got to Boulder, Colorado, and I met up with Chuck Pratt, who had been climbing in Boulder. We decided to travel together back to California. And I got a drive-away car where you deliver a car for people. So we took off and this car broke down. I had $300 in my pocket from selling my pitons. Spending all this money to get it fixed. So I kept all the receipts and everything. And I get to New Mexico and I delivered this car to this woman and she says, "Where have you been?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, this thing is supposed to have been delivered a month ago." And then she goes out, looks at the mileage, and there's tons of mileage on it. And she says, "You've been driving all over the country and with my car." I said, "No, I haven't. I've been fixing your car. It's been breaking down." And so she calls the cops, and the cops give me like 3 hours to get out of town. Pratt has no money. I have no money. Completely broke. So we got a ride with these kids in an Oldsmobile. They went to get some gas, and they were putting in regular in this new Oldsmobile. Some cops were watching. They thought that was kind of weird, because they're supposed to put in ethyl. And so they throw us all in jail. They think we're stealing the car. It was their parents' car or something. They throw us in jail in Grants, New Mexico for 72 hours. That's the most they can hold you without booking you, you know. So we're in this jail cell, and they're, you know, it's a classic jail cell with bars, and they got a little slot where they slide in these tin plates, you know, with your beans. So 3 days in Grants, New Mexico. We get out of there, we're saying, "Oh shit, forget the hitchhiking. Let's hop a freight." We couldn't find a freight car that was open, so we got on a piggyback, which carrying automobiles, and we got in a Jeep Cherokee, crawled in the back, and it was real cold. I woke up in the middle of the night with a flashlight in our eyes. Here's a railroad bull hauling us out of the car, and I said, "Jesus, how'd you find us?" He said, "Well, look at the windows. They're all, you know, frosted over." Yeah. Oh man, hey, take us over to jail, Winslow, Arizona. We go in front of the judge, and he says, "How do you plead?" I said, "Well, what's the charge?" "Well, you're wandering about aimlessly with no apparent means of support. Misdemeanor, vagrancy charge." So we said, "Well, what if we plead innocent? You're going to have to get an attorney. You're going to be here a long time, and we're going to give you a trial in a month or two." I said, "Well, what if we plead guilty?" And he says, "Well, we'll just hold you long enough to check you out with the FBI. You'll be here a few days, then we'll let you out." So, okay, guilty. Bam, 18 days. We get out of there, and once again, you know, they give us 3 hours to get out of town. So we hitchhiked out of there. We made it to Gallup, and we were desperately hungry. We went over to a rescue mission. We had to listen to a Bible story before they gave us a little food. Then they said, "Well, go turn yourself into the jail, and you can sleep in the jail." We go over to this jail. in this concrete cell. No beds or anything, just concrete floor with puke. There was no thought about, you know, phoning your parents and saying, hey, wire me some money.
Yeah.
It never even crossed our minds. And yet, you know, we were starving. So finally get home. Pratt gets home to a draft notice. And then I got mine a couple months later. It was classic.
Hi, I'm Amber Mack, and if you like this video, click to subscribe to the Breakout Project channel to watch more videos just like this one.